Hi, everybody. This is Tony Nash with Complete Intelligence. Thanks for joining us for another quick hit. These are 5 to 10 minute conversations with global experts around economics and trade and markets. Today, we're joined by Silvia Fernandez de Marucci. She's the manager of market analysis and customer relations at the Panama Canal Authority. Silvia, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Well, hello. It's nice to meet you. And I am the manager of market research, as you said. I study all the markets on the Panama Canal, and I am responsible for the pricing strategy, the forecasting of traffic at the canal, and customer relations. That's what I have been doing for probably the past 20 years.
Okay, sounds like a very big responsibility. Sylvia, I think a lot of us have been thinking with the canal, I think a lot of us have been wondering how that's hit world trade, and with things like the trade war, what's happened with regionalization of trade in North America. So if you don't mind, I'd like to dig into a couple of those items. So recently, the CPB out of the Netherlands came out and said that world trade was down by double digits for the first 5 months of the year. Obviously, that's related to COVID. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen at the canal and really what you guys have been doing? Everyone's been in reactionary mode. So what have you seen happening in the market?
Well, at the canal first, I would say that there are some trends that had been present before COVID. As you mentioned, the movement of production from China to the Eastern Asia. And we think that it is a trend that is going to be accelerated by this pandemia. But I don't think that China is going to stop being China. I think it will keep the relevance and the importance in global trade as they have today. We think that probably, yes, we will see more regionalization. We saw the signing of the renewal of the Nafta trade with between Canada, the US, and Mexico. So we think that there may be something happening in that area. However, we don't see that trade is going to stop. I mean, trade is going to continue growing after this pandemic. This is something that I would say very different from anything that we have experienced before, because once it is solved, I don't know if the vaccine appears and people start going back to the new normal, there will be changes probably to the way we do things, and the consumer is going to be very careful and probably will change his habits in order to prevent contagion. But I think trade is going to continue. So we see some of these trends becoming more and more important or faster, at a faster pace. But also we see that we're gonna be coming back for that, because once it's not an economic crisis per se. Once the people are going back to work, the industries restart their operations, people are going to be rehired. So I think the economy should start recovering faster, and I think probably we see some of that, but we are not sure because there's no certainty with this situation. I would say that at first, just to give you a little bit of background of what we have experienced at the canal, we first heard about it early in the year with the cases in China, but then it looked so far away. It was happening to China, it was happening to Italy, and we didn't think about it as something that was so important or so relevant. We were really thinking, wow, this is going to hit us sometime soon. And I would say the first casualty was the passenger vessels. The whole season for cruise ships at the canal was cut short in March, and Panama went to a lockdown, to a total lockdown on March 25.
Okay.
And that's when I think it really started for us when we received the news of a cruise ship arriving in Panama with influenza-like disease on board that wanted to cross, which was the Sandam, and I think you have seen it in the news. It was a humanitarian transit through the canal, and probably the first one that we had with the COVID patients on board.
And how much of your traffic is cruise ships?
It's very small, to be honest.
Okay.
It's less than 2% of our traffic.
Okay.
But still, it's an important. We see it as an important segment, not only because of the traffic through the canal, but also because of what it does to the local economy. We have a lot of visitors, a lot of tourism, and that is a good injection of cash coming to Panama. So this, it was probably the end of the season, but it was shorter than what we would have wanted.
Okay. So when we saw the first wave of COVID go through Asia, did you see a sharp decline in vessel traffic in, say, Feb, March, or was it pretty even? Did we not see that much? Because I've spoken to people in air freight, and they said it was dramatic, the fall off they saw. I would imagine in sea freight it's not as dramatic, but did you see a fall off?
Well, since it started in January, this is the very low season for containers, for example, which is probably the most important market segments in terms of contribution to tolls. So when we saw that there was this COVID happening in Chinese New Year, so everything was closed, we were in a slow season, so we didn't see much of an impact. And as I said, for the canal, there is a lagging effect because we are probably 23 days away in voyage terms. So whatever happens in China, we will feel it probably 1 month later. So we expected January and February to be slow because of the normal, the seasonality of the trade. But then after March, I would say that April was probably the worst, one of the worst months for us. We had been, we were hit April, then May was worse than April, and then June, that was even worse than May.
So June was worse than May.
June was worse than May. We had seen like a 4%, 10%, 14 or 16% decline each month. So it was like, oh wow, this is really this is really getting worse. We had reviewed our forecast in April, and I think so far it is behaving as we expected back then. But there's nothing written about COVID, and things are really we are learning as we go. So I would say that container vessels were also affected these 3 months of the year, and as I said, as a lagging effect. We have LNG vessels that were supposed to deliver natural gas to Japan, Korea, and China. And LNG had been behaving very badly all year. For our fiscal year starts in October. So when I talk about my fiscal year, I think about the beginning of the fall, and then it comes winter for Asia. So that is kind of a peak season for LNG. And LNG has been having a hard time because the demand was oversupplied and the prices were very low. So many shipments that were supposed to end up in Asia ended up in Europe or other destinations that were more profitable for the owners. We thought, okay, LNG is not doing well, but when the price of oil collapsed and went negative, the prices of LNG were affected in the Middle East and became more competitive than the U.S. prices. So we saw a harsher decline in LNG shipments. So we see, for example, 30% less than we expected to see. And by COVID in April, it was probably 50% below what we were expecting.
Wow.
So it was major, and I guess it's a matter of demand, because since the whole Asia was locked down, there was no demand for it.
When the industry stops, you don't need energy. It's terrible.
Exactly.
It's really terrible.
It was terrible, but we had some stars in our trade that supported the situation, like LPG. You know, the LPG is the cooking gas, and obviously people were cooking more at home, so the demand was high, and we saw an increase in trade for LPG. It's a good market for us for the Neo-Panamax locks. So in a way, we are grateful that our trade has not suffered as much as we have seen in other areas.
Okay, so you said you declined into June. How have things been in July so far?
Well, July seems promising. We came from a very bad June that was close, probably 16% below what we expected to have. But July is about maybe 7% below our expectation. So I would say there is I would say that it's really recovering and have restarted to open up the economy. But we are very concerned about a potential, a W-shaped recovery because of the new cases that we have seen in the U.S.
Sure. Okay, that's fair. Now, going on to regionalization, when we saw factories close across Asia in the first quarter, and in some cases stay until the second quarter, did you see some of the folks who are shipping through the canal start to pivot their production to North America? And are you seeing that, first of all? And second of all, as that happens, does that impact canal traffic? So is it still happening, say, within the region via sea freight, or does that then transit or transition to being, say, trucking freight or something like that?
I would say that it's probably too early to say. I don't think that we will see the effects of COVID probably in terms of nearshoring, maybe in 2 years. I don't think that the companies or the factories are so quick as to move the production, especially during this period in which everybody's still trying to cope with the situation
and manage their
the
risk,
contagion. Right? Yes. So I don't see that happening anytime soon, but it's probably something that the factories and the companies are going to start speeding up and diversifying their production.
And as you said earlier, China's still going to be there. China's not going to disappear as an origin, right? What I've been saying to people is it's incremental manufacturing that may move. It's not the mainstay of Chinese manufacturing that's going to move or regionalize. They're still going to do much of the commoditized manufacturing there because the infrastructure is there, the sunk cost is there, and they need to earn out the value of those factories, right? So I like your timeline of 2 years before you really start to see an impact, because we may see some incremental movement and maybe some very high value, high tech stuff or something like that move first, but the volume of things probably won't happen for at least 2 years. Is that fair to say?
I would say so, and I would add that we have seen these shifts to Vietnam and Malaysia and other countries in Asia, but we still see containerized cargo shipping from China. It's like the volumes are still not high enough to be shipping directly from those countries. So the container may come from Vietnam and from Malaysia, and they come to Shanghai or to another port in China, they consolidate the vessel there, and the vessel departs from those ports. So in terms of canal, for us, that is good news. And I would say that probably Korea is trying to attract that transshipment as well, to do so the long voyage will start in China or in Korea or in Japan instead of,
Okay.
of these other countries that are further away from our area of relevance.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then Sylvia, just one last question. How do you see transit changing over the next 5 to 10 years? What are you seeing from the canal perspective in the way your operations will change? Does it have to do with security? Does it have to do with information? Does it have to do with the size of vessel or frequency of transit? What kind of things are you seeing from your perspective, and what are your customers asking for?
Well, to be fair, I feel like very uncomfortable to say anything about what is going to be
Okay.
our operation because we are still adjusting to what is happening.
Sure.
I think that we have always been very regulated, and
Right.
let's mean it in a bad way. What I mean is that we have always had our protocols and codes for
Right.
attending every situation. And to be
Right.
fair, we have our protocol for infectious diseases that was the
Sure.
basis to start working with COVID.
Right.
Um, we think that at the canal, probably what we will see in the future is more technology to
Okay.
improve the operation. I'm not sure exactly how, but definitely there are many machine learning and artificial intelligence that may help us
Sure.
be more accurate in our forecasts and probably uh, organize our traffic in a way that is faster, or we
Sure.
make better use of the assets. Um, but I don't know. I think the canal is 106 years
Yeah.
old, so I think we have been adjusting every time to the new ways of the world, and we'll continue to do so
Very good.
as a trade enabler.
That's right. Very good. Sylvia, thank you so much for your time. This has been very insightful. I really do hope that we can connect again in some time and just see how trade recovers and what we look like maybe going into 2021 or something like that. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thanks to you.
All right. Bye.